Salem, thank you for taking the time out and have a chat with me. As you would know, today it's a Freedom Day in South Africa, the 27th of April, 2023. But this day have a very significant to South Africans because it's the first time we actually got the opportunity to vote. So this is not the independence type of day. This is the day where people got the right to vote. So on the 27th of April in 1994, a lot of people cast their votes. So there was a 3-day vote. There was the 25th, the 26th, and the 27th. But the main date was the 27th, and I can still remember the excitements of my grandparents, the uncles, and it's finally you get an opportunity for the liberation parties and everyone to openly canvass and vote. So and that came sadly after the death of Chris Hani, I think 4 months or 5 months earlier. So it's a very, or 6 months, almost a year earlier, almost a year earlier. So it was a very bittersweet moment for South Africans at that particular point. So thank you for taking the time out and have this conversation on freedom today. And today we're going to talk about freedom of the press, media, and the spaces that we occupy.
I wanted to thank you for having me. I think it's such a special day to commemorate. I think it's a day that I long for, the day I get to cast a ballot in a liberated Palestine to choose our leadership. I think that will be a special day. And I think to the topic of our conversation around media and narrative, and I think a fight for liberation, at the heart of it is essentially the fight for a narrative and a story. And that is so essential, and how that is built, how that is disseminated. Because I think what we consume, or what we've been inundated with, is a very specific, hegemonic narrative about where we come from, but also about the world. And so there's a lot that is unfree about it in many ways, because these are the narratives that maintain the systems of oppression and domination that we've had to fight against to become free. So I think it's a very apt conversation to have on this day. And so I wanna ask you, I mean, why did you start Abrasive Media, and how does that fit in for you in the pursuit of freedom? Because one of the conversations you and I had in South Africa, and we had with everyone, was, do you feel free? And we didn't get straightforward answers, huh? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on your media company, on freedom in South Africa today. What does that all look like?
All right, so thank you for that question. I would answer that question by saying is that I felt uncomfortable that I encountered a version of myself which is not me. So normally when people are telling stories about my community, people from my specific identity, but people are generally that were just oppressed in South Africa, it comes from a specific worldview, and it comes from a specific narrative or trope that is already established. So, for example, people that is classified colored in South Africa, when you think of them, they normally your gangsters, the most violent of all. So if you think of a violent character in South Africa, then you think about a colored man. If you think about a black man, then you have a specific trope in your mind. If you think about the Indian person, then you have a specific trope in your mind. And it's not just to men, but also women. There is this tropes of women of different races. And I was tired of that specific narrative or that specific view that I constantly encountered. So I decided to start telling a different story, telling a story from the inside. Most cases, the story is from the outside. So I know the nuances of the inside. I know how to carefully tread around certain issues where other people will have no respect, no decency. They will just go to the most sensitive part of that particular thing. Where from the inside you can tell a much nuance and a better story. But it from the inside and telling your own story, you're also given the dignity and the freedom to tell your story. So, and I have a question for you, because working with you in Cape Town and thinking back, it was such a magical week. And it feels like, and it always feels like we spend more time in Cape Town, but it wasn't. It was just a week, and it felt like a lifetime that we spent together in Cape Town. And you're currently busy with a series on South Africa, brilliant series. I love it. It's so authentic, and it's so carefully done. So you left Cape Town and you decided, okay, I'm going to start uncivilized media, and we had conversations with regards to how uncivilized media started. But just for my audience, how does uncivilized media came? Because it's quite a brilliant name. It's a brilliant name, but uncivilized media, what does it mean, and what does it mean to you, and what are you trying to do with uncivilized media?
Let me tell you, Jacob, there's no uncivilized media without the trip to South Africa. It wouldn't have happened in the format, in the substance, without having spent that week with you and with Vianney, Lizo, the whole crew we were hanging out with and spending time with and talking to. It was truly a transformative trip for me. And I think also working in that medium, having a camera in the hand and having honest, vulnerable, intimate conversations with people who let you into their thoughts, their feelings about very heavy and complicated subjects, right, was incredibly moving to me. And I think that's why you and I built such a strong connection, because we were on a journey together, journeys that were in many ways similar, but in many ways different, right? I'm a foreigner, I'm a visitor in your country, you're someone who's from there and so are familiar with these stories. But I think me accessing South Africa through your eyes, and then you seeing South Africa from my eyes as a visitor and as a Palestinian, I think had quite a transformative effect on both of us. And I think that planted the seed of desire and inspiration and curiosity to tell stories and to connect with people in the same way. And so the last day or 2 days I was in South Africa coincided with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And the media coverage around that, I think, fundamentally showed how hegemonic, predominantly Western, predominantly white media companies, establishments, outlets communicate about issues and subjects and places that are not brown or black. And the way they frame that subject as, oh, it's not happening in Africa, it's not happening in the Middle East, this is happening in civilized Europe, and all the racist undertones that were no longer undercurrents, but quite visible in the coverage. After having spent a week talking about white supremacy and apartheid in South Africa, the juxtaposition of those two things was very glaring to me. And in that moment, I truly understood the power of narrative and stories to shape our reality. I mean, they really can. And so from there, I decided that I want to do this full time. And that's where the name Uncivilized came from. It came from a political commentary on the coverage of the war on Ukraine and being sick and tired of having a media dictate our stories about us, and finding a platform or building a platform where we can tell those stories for ourselves. And the idea was also to build an entity that can entertain and engage people. Because also I've being an activist for a long time, people don't like being preached to. And so it's how do you engage and entertain people, but fundamentally educate and politicize and provide a counter hegemonic narrative that can allow solidarity to form, and hopefully one day will lead to some sort of action. So those are the origins of Uncivilized, and I think a big part is thanks to you, thanks to the trip in South Africa, and I'm excited to see where it goes. You know, there are so many stories to be told. I'm currently in the US telling story. I mean, I'll tell you this, Jacob. I spoke to someone who's working on the issue of food here, access to food, and you know, I've understood the term as food desert, where Black communities in the U.S. don't have access to fresh, healthy foods. But when I spoke to one of the activists here, they said to me, "It's not a food desert. The food is available. It's just who has access to it, and we call it food apartheid." Yeah, and so it's like in New York, like the symbol of American excess and exceptionalism and capitalism, and they are talking about food apartheid here. So that was just connecting the systems of oppression and domination all over the world, and the fundamental message is we can't be free until others are free, because the systems that oppress us are one and the same.
Brilliant. And I think since you decided this year, look, I'm going to go full time in it. You kind of really just start running, and some of the stories that you put out there is quite amazing. The one of the ones that I enjoyed the most so far is the food one, because the food one is so different than what you normally get on TV. What you will get on TV is those type of stories where this is how to make this food. But you connecting it to the essence of a culture, of a people, their specific soul. So when you engage them and you listen to them and you say that this is more than food. This is those people's being, and you really open my eyes that about the importance of food. So just a quick question: why food, and why did you decide that food is such a important story to tell, and why that specific approach?
Food is central to human survival, and food is something we all can relate to. And food is fundamentally political. And so when you're dealing with these systems of domination, whether it's around race, colonialism, capitalism, patriarchy, whatever it is, there's an element of erasure and erasure of culture, etc. And that always tends to filter down to food. So food for me is a representation and can tell a very powerful story and connect dots that sometimes are hard to do otherwise. And it's also a way to be able to relate to people and engage with people. And so I found that as something really interesting to explore. And a part of what we're doing is we're still in the early stages of Uncivilized, and so there's a lot of experimentation, and we're giving ourselves room to fail. So we've done a lot of food related content. We've done some fashion content around capitalism. I'd love to do more sports content in the future. But I'm trying to find threads that connect people, right? Again, it comes back to this point about entertaining and engaging, not just preaching to or preaching at. So food has been a very powerful vehicle for a lot of these conversations. And the next episode on South Africa is the one we filmed with Selwa in your place, where we cooked butterbean curry. And again, it's how does a cuisine, the Cape Malay cuisine, originate from slavery? And that's how does a unique identity emerge from that, and a culture emerge from that, built on emancipation, built on color, built on richness, when all of that has been stripped away from them in the past. So I think it's a very powerful medium for storytelling. I don't want to just do food, but at the moment it seems food is quite a powerful thing.
Because it's so refreshing. It's not your normal how to make it. It's the kind of conversation. You know how food bring people together and have a conversation. That's literally what you experience. So it's that openness, is that relaxed environment that you're watching it. In most cases, when I watch the food episodes, I'm actually eating. I'm eating something just to join in the whole conversation. But I have another question for you, and that question is, are you free?
Am I free?
Yeah. I think you asked me the same question in Cape Town, so now I'm asking you that question.
Look, the answer is no. I don't feel free.
Just back up, just back off a little bit. In terms of, I know there's you as a Palestinian, but I don't want you to separate the two. But this is just a general question. Not so. If you ask me that question, is Jacob Cloete free? Then I might be able to give you an answer now. So that's the context of the question. So it's unfair if I put it in a context for you, but I just wanted you to see the context in which I'm asking it. Are you free?
Am I free? Not just as a Palestinian, but more generally. Is that the question? Or yeah, it's a tough question to answer, and I mean I understand why a lot of the people we talked to together struggled with it. Look, I'm a multidimensional person, as many of us are, and a part of me is Palestinian, but it's not entirely who I am. And for me, freedom is the freedom from domination, is the freedom to do what you want without a system of oppression hanging over you, but also then in relation to the rights of others. And in many ways, I can travel the world. I can tell stories. When I'm not in Palestine, I have the freedom of movement, which for me is one of the freedoms I enjoy the most. I tend to, whenever I leave Palestine, I tend to take very long walks, because when I'm there, I can't walk much. And that for me is a sense of freedom, and I feel free. So in that sense, I do feel that freedom. But because I don't feel that system of domination as crushingly as when I'm back home. Yeah, so I think it depends is my answer.
It depends.
It
And
depends. It depends on time and on space, when and where I am.
and I'm so glad you bring freedom of movement in, and your answer is very a very complex answer, and the reason why I started off with this question is to kind of lay a base for the next question I'm going to ask. So there's this concept of media freedom, of freedom of expression, and freedom of the press and freedom of the media. So all of these three things is kind of interrelated. They speak to one another. So this is the question. Do you think there's supposed to be limitations on that freedom? Or is it supposed to be completely free to tell it in whatever way we would like to tell it?
Yeah, I think this is one of the topics of the day, and it's also not a straightforward answer. Are you should we have the right to free speech? Yes, but I think also free speech in relation to something, to someone. And I think we, at the end of the day, we're social beings. We live in a society. We don't live in a vacuum. It's not, we are not the centers of the universe. So I think this is a very important point to make. And I think uh, you think about what it means to be in a society, and I think you should be able to say anything you want, but within limits. For example, I think libel or defamation, right? Those things have consequences. There's accountability. When you spread misinformation, that has an impact. Um, so I think there needs to be a form of accountability in relation to free speech. The press should be held accountable, right? I mean, there are universal standards for the way you report on things, um, within set criteria. Because at the end of the day, when you have a platform and reaching millions of people, there needs to be a sense of accountability about what you can say. But that for me is not censorship, right? Those are two different things. Accountability does not equal censorship, which is something we also face. I think when you live under specific types of regimes, whether they're dictatorships, or an authoritarian regime, or a colonial regime that suppresses and censors people, where you're not allowed to express any opinion, especially opinions that are in opposition to that system, that's different. That's fundamentally different to me than operating within a society where there is the right to free speech, but there's accountability in relation to other people and in relation to that society.
So I want to pause on two things. So the one thing is on accountability, and then the other concept, that the difference between democratic societies and your kind of authoritarian societies. Now, I've been following the politics, but especially the news of the US quite closely. And it started with 2016, especially with social media, how social media influenced the 2016 elections. I think it was the Cambridge scandal, Cambridge Analytic scandal that came out. So I've been following it closely. So in the States currently, and you are there is only two views. There is not a lot of views. You have the CNN view, which is your kind of supposedly liberal democratic view, and then you have the Fox News view, which is supposed to be your conservative view. That's the only two views that's the spaces. And they too have opposing narratives and it just circulates. Now, what it creates with those two dominant narratives that is circulating, none of the marginal or the ones in below gets into mainstream media. And what you find below it lurks all of your conspiracy, all of the inaccuracies, because it doesn't get an opportunity to verify and get into this. So, and this is the question I would like to ask you, is that is the American system, is that really freedom of press? Is that free media? Or is it another system of domination?
This is a very good question, and I'm glad you asked this. Look, at the end of the day, the US is a settler colony. It's a white Christian settler colony. And the narrative, going back to narratives and stories, that narrative runs through the veins of this country and its institutions, whether political, whether financial, and whether the press. And so to challenge that narrative fundamentally and question the origins of this country, whether it's the genocide that was committed against the indigenous population, whether it's slavery, whether it's institutional racism and segregation, and a form of apartheid as well, is not something that exists within the mainstream. I'm in the US now, but I've also studied in the US for my university, and I consumed a lot this national myth of American exceptionalism, of that settler colonial mentality. It's very present in everything. The flag, the national anthem, the militarization of society, where the army shows up to sports games and they have a reunification with their family after serving overseas. It's very present, this national mythology. And so the press is culpable. Like, it's part of that narrative. It pushes those stories. And so I don't think there will be fundamentally a full freedom of the press, of expression of the opinion, until that established mythology and narrative is challenged. And it's challenged within also the institutions. Because at the moment, the conversations are around very basic liberal conceptions of representation, right? But it's not about challenging the hegemonic narrative itself that exists in this country, which trickles down into everything, especially the press and the politics. And I think you visit the US now, and I was here a while back, but you can see a decaying empire. You can see a decaying settler colony. And in a time of polarization, of tribalization, it's very tangible, more than any time, I think, that I've experienced. So it's a very interesting time in the US and in the trajectory of the settler colony, and that applies to all aspects of its existence.
Okay, so what you are saying is that the press in the US is a reflection of its founding principles. The violence that brought it into existence, the press is a reflection of that. So which brings me now to a kind of question where us are fitting. Abrasive media and uncivilized media is fitting. What is our role?
Our role is to challenge this hegemony. Our role is to challenge not just the surface level conversations, but connect things fundamentally to their roots. And so it's not just talking about Democrats versus Republicans. It's talking about two parties that fundamentally exist in a settler colonial society, where those founding principles continue to inform the national myth and narrative. That's the role, and connect that not just to the history of the U.S. but the history of the rest of the world, right? And I think we're now also in a very transitional moment in global world order with the BRICS, China, etc., really challenging a unipolar world. And so we're getting a different narrative. Maybe it's not always in line with our values, but the world is shifting. And so these stories, these narratives need to be told, and especially now. I think that's incredibly important. Incredible. So that's the role I see for ourselves, is continue to tell the stories that shape the fundamental systems of domination and do it in a way that really educate and engage people.
So how do we stay then true to the course? Because let's take your Fox News, let's take CNN, let's take any other media house, company, conglomerate in this world. They once were us. So how do we stay uncorruptible?
That's tough. It's very hard. And I think it always comes back to money. It's money, and it's how do you build something that is ultimately driven or self-sustained through the people. And I think this is where the social media, self-financing platforms like Patreon are coming in and really changing the game, because you no longer need a gatekeeper to let you in to have a platform. You don't need the CNNs of the world or the MSNBC or the Fox News to reach people. You can do it through your YouTube channel. You can do it through your Instagram page. And if you are supported by people and financially supported by people, then you are able to sustain this without the need to compromise your vision, your values, or your narrative. And it's something that we're seeing the models of. It exists at the moment. I mean, I think one of the biggest media shows in the world is Joe Rogan's podcast on YouTube, and then now on Spotify, but fundamentally supported by the people, right? And I think, and he has this approach, whether you agree or disagree with his politics, is not an endorsement or denunciation, but I'm saying if you look at the model, he has hundreds of millions of listeners that are willing to engage with it, and his message is not corrupted by specific political interests. So it's a very interesting model to pursue, and I think that is very, very essential for the longevity and also the connectedness to your values and narrative without straying too far from the cause.
So I hope that is our journey, because as we grow as companies and as we get bigger, we have to bring people on board. And even sometimes the companies with the best ideals and values sometimes make mistakes. And if we make those mistakes, I hope and I pray that we would be the ones that would stand up and say that we made a mistake and not spin it in that particular moment. Because I think when we get to that specific point, that will be the true test of leadership and what we are believing in. So a final question before our time runs out. What is next for Uncivilized Media? What can we look forward to?
We have the rest of the South Africa series coming out over the next month and a half. We have 3 episodes left. We're doing stuff around fine dining, labor, and food security and sustainability around the world, tying all those. I'm doing some fun stuff in the US around food. One is around Malaysia. The other one is the Galagici tribe, essentially a community, which is one of the only communities in the US that has essentially kept its African identity and traditions. So that's a very interesting story. So a lot of those stories and something about the US colonialism of Puerto Rico, hopefully. So a lot in the pipeline, a lot in the pipeline.
Okay. So I'm a fan. I'm really a big fan. You don't know how much of a fan I am. So I'm a big fan, and I'm looking forward. Thank you, brother. So I'm looking forward to the work that is coming up. So I will keep you up to speed of what I will be doing. But Uncivilized Media, please keep doing what you are doing, my brother. And I hope as you continue this journey, that this conversation will stick with us, especially the question that I asked around, are we free? And will be corrupted? I don't believe in the issue or the whole narrative that you have to be poor, because we don't have to suffer. But there needs to be guiding principles. There needs to be fundamental values that is guiding us when we're doing it. And that's my prayer, is that the way Uncivilized is set up now, that 100 years from now, that's still going to be Uncivilized Media.